Our top story, the US says it's prepared for more strikes against Syria after firing 59 missiles at one of the country's key air bases. The attack on Friday killed at least 9 civilians and 5 Syrian soldiers. Moscow's described the strike as aggression against a sovereign state and warned of grave consequences now for the Middle East.
Our military destroyed the airfield from which this week's chemical strike took place. We were fully justified in doing so.
We see it as a violation of international law and as an act of aggression.
Beyond any doubt that the Syrian regime has used chemical weapons against its own people multiple times.
We said, show us the evidence. Specialists will decide whether it's true or not.
Strengthening Assad will only lead to more murders.
Once again, the Syrian army is and continues to be the main anti-terrorist force.
The Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons has only begun its investigation, but U.S. officials have expressed certainty that Bashar Assad carried out the chemical attack and that President Trump did not need anybody's authorization, neither of the UN Security Council nor of the U.S. Congress. American allies on the Security Council backed President Trump's decision to bomb the Syrian airbase after the fact. Moscow said it believes on April 4th, the Syrian Air Force bombed a warehouse near Idlib where terrorists held their chemical weapons. As an example of what can happen when a country takes military action without waiting for results of an investigation, Bolivia's ambassador to the UN brought the images of America's presentation of Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction in 2003, which turned out to be false.
I believe that we must remember these pictures. In this very hall, we were told that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and this was the motivation for the invasion. It launched a series of atrocities in the region. Would we be talking about ISIL and attacks in various parts of the world if this illegal invasion didn't take place?
In the meantime, Ambassador Haley said the U.S. is prepared to do more in Syria, suggesting that there may be more military action against Syrian forces.
This isn't the first time a US president's ordered military action without UN approval or without going before Congress. Artizili Petrenka next looks at what's changed from 2003 in Iraq to Donald Trump's attack now on Syria.
Old school intervention versus new school intervention. Here we go. What did it take to get started in Iraq some 15 years ago? At least a number of formalities, like months of putting intel reports together, presenting evidence, which led to a high degree of confidence that Iraq was running a program of weapons of mass destruction, like Colin Powell's now iconic show, and everything he had to say at the UN Security Council.
Less than a teaspoon of dry anthrax, a little bit about this amount. This is just about the amount of a teaspoon. Iraq declared 8,500 liters of anthrax.
I'm sure you know it then turned out this Saddam and his WMD story was a lie. But I'm not trying to make that point again. At least they tried to justify their case to the world. My point is George Bush's order to wipe out the Saddam Hussein regime required all-out diplomatic battles on all fronts. But that was so 2003. It's 2017, folks. No time to be so boringly formal. Such slow coaches. Just 72 hours later, and American tomahawks hit Syria. Okay, fair enough. For a minute, it looked like Washington was playing old school. They did wait for a Security Council session to take place, where it was made abundantly clear that most members had already made up their minds about who is to blame for the chemical disaster in Syria.
We have every indication that this was a sustained attack using aircraft over a number of hours.
An international investigation hasn't even kicked off yet, and the UN itself cannot confirm the means of the attack.
Reports have stated that the attack was carried out through an airstrike on a residential area. However, the means of delivery of the alleged attack cannot be definitely confirmed at this stage.
But who cares? 3 days are enough to draw your own conclusions with a high degree of confidence.
Our intelligence community, in cooperation with our friends and partners and allies around the world, collaborated to determine with a very high degree of confidence precisely where the location originated.
Congressional approval, Mr. Trump knows what that is, and UN resolutions simply no longer matter, according to the new school way of doing things.
Andrew Farmer spoke with British MP Crispin Blunt, chairman of the UK Foreign Affairs Select Committee, about the evidence, or rather lack of it, against the Syrian government.
We have the evidence of 80 dead people on the ground where there has now been post-mortems to establish they did actually die of nerve agent, and certainly their symptoms are completely
consistent. But where's the evidence of who did it,
nerve
Crispin?
agent poisoning. Well, this evidence is going to obviously have to be
what evidence? What have they provided?
But what you couldn't have is what you couldn't then have. Well, the evidence is there on the ground that there was a chemical weapons strike.
Yeah, but who did it?
Of some kind. The case that was. The case that, well, the Americans are saying without doubt it was done by the Syrian
So why
Air
don't they
Force.
provide the
And
evidence?
there is no evidence. There is no evidence coming back on. Well, the evidence is there on the ground. The people in the forms of the casualties, and the use of chemical weapons is immensely serious. Now, I accept that it seems very strange that the Syrian Air Force would use these weapons at this time, given the reaction that's going to happen. And indeed, Syria shouldn't have any chemical weapons. They were meant to have been disarmed in 2013.
Sure,
People like me voted against the action in 2013 because it wasn't going to achieve the objective of disarming Syria. The Russians oversaw the disarmament of Syria, and now we see the Syrian armed forces using chemical weapons.
Hang on, but
you are anticipating that there
again,
would be
I do stress
there would be no response.
They deny using those chemical weapons, and the UN did actually say that they believe that Syria had complied and got rid of their chemical weapons. But we do know that areas where the UN couldn't actually carry out their research during that time were areas held by the rebels. And the accusation now is this could have been actually a Syrian attack by the rebels. I mean, the point I'm trying to make, Crispin, is there are a lot of counter-arguments and unilateral action is being taken, and it doesn't seem to be... There doesn't seem to be a comprehensive take on exactly what has happened. There are many arguments and counter-arguments. Surely we should wait until we know exactly what has happened before taking action.
What we're relying on here is the Americans being 100% certain of the
Can we really trust
of this
them?
attack. And if they and they have taken that responsibility. Now, there of course then will be further investigations, no doubt taking many weeks, if not months, of research into this, as people no doubt try to see if whether there is any evidence at all to support the Syrian and Russian claims.